Washington is moving through a critical moment. The streets, the polls, and the political tension all converge in one place: the figure of Donald Trump. Approval ratings show a steady decline, while massive demonstrations outside the White House demand his removal. The country watches with a mix of confusion and exhaustion as presidential power faces pressure not only from the opposition but from the internal erosion of the administration itself. In the heart of the Capitol, the atmosphere has turned electric. For hours, thousands of citizens gathered in front of the presidential residence in a protest that became more than a political demonstration. It became a social thermometer. Chants, signs, and improvised speeches carried a unified message: the nation has lost confidence in its leadership. The echo of those voices resonates beyond Washington and exposes a frustration spreading across the country. Polling data confirms what the streets are already signaling. The president's approval rating is sinking to its lowest level since his return to power. Moderate voters who once gave him the benefit of the doubt now blame him for economic deterioration and political chaos. Unemployment is rising, prices remain high, and the tariffs imposed by the administration have driven up production costs. Meanwhile, the deficit grows, the dollar weakens, and promises of industrial resurgence fade into contradictions. Trump tries to keep the initiative with forceful statements, but the message no longer convinces. The strategy of constant confrontation, once a powerful political weapon, is now working against him. Every attack on the press, every criticism of the protesters, every defiant post on social media accelerates the erosion. The public sees a government more focused on fighting enemies than solving problems. In Congress, the atmosphere is no better. Opposition lawmakers are seizing the moment to demand transparency and review the administration's actions. But the most troubling signs for the president come from within his own party. Some allies are beginning to step back. They do not say it publicly, but behind closed doors they admit the situation is worsening at a dangerous pace. The internal fracture is still quiet, but could soon turn visible if the polls continue to fall. Political analysts agree that the turning point was the combination of economic crisis and social mobilization. The country is facing a scenario of rising prices, shrinking wages, and collapsing business confidence. Unions warn of plant closures and mass layoffs in manufacturing, while small businesses struggle with record costs. That frustration translates into political discontent, and discontent into protest. It's the same cycle that has historically pushed entire governments to the brink. The demonstrations outside the White House were not spontaneous, but they were inevitable. Workers, students, retirees, and professionals stood side by side. People who, just a few years ago, saw Trump as a symbol of change now view him as an obstacle. Their message was clear: the country is tired of incendiary rhetoric and policies that fail to improve daily life. Aerial images of the protests spread worldwide, interpreted as a sign of rupture between the president and his own base. Meanwhile, the White House is trying to contain the damage. Cabinet members multiply public appearances, announce job programs, and promise new investments. But the results do not appear. Consumer spending slows, credit becomes more expensive, and the fiscal deficit balloons. Even the financial sector, historically close to Republican power, is showing concern. Banks warn that political instability could affect global confidence in U.S. debt. International reaction has been swift. In Europe and Asia, governments are closely monitoring the instability in Washington. Traditional allies are uneasy watching a polarized country with growing protests and an administration that seems more focused on defense than governance. Leaked diplomatic reports mention fears that the internal crisis could affect major trade agreements and create volatility in global markets. The symbolic impact of the demonstrations is even greater than the economic one. Seeing the presidential residence surrounded by citizens calling for the removal of a sitting president is an image that once seemed unthinkable. Today, it reflects a change in the political era. Power can no longer rely solely on formal authority. It requires social legitimacy, and that legitimacy is fading. Polls capture this sentiment with brutal clarity. More than 60% of Americans believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. Only a minority thinks the administration can reverse the situation before the next elections. And perhaps most worrying for the White House is that disillusionment now includes groups that once supported Trump enthusiastically. In the halls of Congress, some say that discussions about launching a formal investigation are already underway. No one is openly talking about removal, not yet, but the preparatory moves are there. Opposition leaders know political erosion builds over time and that momentum is on their side. Every week without concrete solutions increases pressure on the executive and strengthens the narrative of a cornered government. Trump, however, shows no signs of backing down. He keeps his public agenda active, holds mass rallies in key states, and insists everything is part of a media-driven conspiracy. But the gap between rhetoric and reality widens. Voters no longer judge speeches by their tone, but by their results, and results are not showing up. Political communication experts warn that the White House has lost control of the narrative. The focus is no longer on promises of growth but on indicators of failure. The protests keep expanding, and the decline in the polls has become a trend. The administration, trapped between the need to show authority and the risk of deepening division, faces the most delicate dilemma of its term. The country watches closely. Every move, every statement, every silence from the White House now impacts markets, media, and public opinion. Washington, the epicenter of power, has become a stage of uncertainty where no one knows how long the balance can hold. And while all of this unfolds, ordinary citizens feel the impact directly. Prices rise, bills grow, credit becomes inaccessible. Politics is no longer perceived as ideological debate but as a threat to everyday life. This is the new reality shaping the national mood. A divided, exhausted country increasingly skeptical of presidential leadership. The next few weeks will be decisive. If protests continue and approval ratings keep falling, political pressure could escalate into a full institutional crisis. Trump still holds formal control of the government, but the emotional foundation of his power weakens with every headline, every poll, and every protest. The risk is no longer losing popularity. It's losing authority. And in politics, once authority evaporates, the end accelerates. The United States faces an uncomfortable, defining question. Are we witnessing the beginning of the end of Donald Trump's leadership, or the start of an unprecedented new phase of confrontation? The streets seem to have their own answer. The country is no longer watching in silence. It is speaking, shouting, demanding. Because, in the end, what's at stake is not just one man, but the future of a system long believed to be unbreakable. Like and subscribe to Critical Point to stay ahead of the global power shifts.